Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Recently, Donald Trump has proposed to ban all Muslims from entering the United States of America. All Muslims, regardless of the country of origin, regardless of anything really. All Muslims. He wants to prevent all Muslims from entering this country. And this isn't the first anti-Muslim proposal that this man has presented. He's talked about closing mosques. He's talked about increasing surveillance of Muslim communities. He's even expressed an openness or a willingness to the idea of requiring Muslims to carry special identification. He's expressed an openness to the idea of requiring Muslims to register in a database. These ideas are alarming for a couple of reasons. First of all, as many people know, I'm a Muslim. And as a Muslim and as an African American, I find these ideas to be frightening. And I can't understand why any African American would condone discrimination against an entire religious group. Given our history as a people, our history of being discriminated against and oppressed, I simply can't understand why any black person would support this kind of discrimination. But here on YouTube, you have African Americans who condone this stuff. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you why I oppose it. First of all, these ideas are rooted in fear and ignorance, and they're irrational ideas. They're ideas that are based upon generalizations. Wide sweeping generalizations. You cannot judge an entire religion based on the conduct of a few adherents, a few people who claim to be members of that religious group. So you had terrorist attacks in Paris recently, and you had a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California. And in response to those attacks, there has been a lot of fear and anxiety, and there's been a negative or anti-Muslim backlash as well. And Donald Trump is seizing the moment, and he's using it to advance his political agenda. So you can't condemn an entire religion based on the conduct of a few people. Just like you don't condemn all Christians or all anti-abortion activists based on the conduct of that white man who went to a Planned Parenthood facility in Colorado Springs and shot it up and killed a few people. This man proclaimed that he's a warrior for the babies, for the unborn. But nobody is rounding up white male, middle-aged people who are members of anti-abortion groups. They're not rounding up all white men because of that. And you have many other examples of white people committing acts of terrorism in this country. And you don't see anyone rushing to racially profile and oppress an entire group of white men simply because of the actions of a few of them. You don't see people condemning all Christians because of the conduct of the KKK, a group that professes to be a Christian group, a group that literally lights the Christian cross on fire to terrorize people. You don't see people condemning all Christians because of the actions of the KKK. You simply don't. And you have the example of Jim Jones, a cult leader who commanded his followers to commit suicide, and hundreds of them died. And he professed to be a Christian. No one is universally condemning Christianity because of the actions of Jim Jones. because it would be irrational to do so. You can't judge an entire group based on the actions of a few within that group. And the examples go on and on. We as a people, as African American people, we should understand this more than anyone else should, because we have experienced discrimination. We have been victims of prejudice and racism. We have been collectively judged and punished as a group. You have the example in New York, because some African Americans sell drugs or use illegal guns. You have the New York Police Department frisking and searching innocent black people by the tens of thousands simply because of the color of their skin, because they quote unquote fit the profile. That's just fundamentally wrong, to condemn and punish an entire group of people for the actions of a few. Also, it's just not smart in terms of being good police work or good policy, period. And I'm going to explain that a little bit further in here, why it's not a good policy to ban all Muslims from entering this country. First of all, these ideas further polarize the Muslims and the Christians. It feeds into the narrative presented by these hateful terrorist groups. They want there to be a conflict between Muslims and Christians. They want that. And when you have people imposing these discriminatory ideas, that further divides Muslims and Christians. And it plays into this narrative that Christians are crusaders against Muslims and Islam. Also, it's just not effective. Banning all Muslims from entering this country, that alienates America's allies. America, in its war, so-called war on terrorism, America relies on Muslim allies in that fight. The people who are waging war against ISIS, who are on the ground, on the front lines, fighting against this terrorist organization, those people are Muslims. Most of the people that are killed by these terrorist hate groups are Muslims. While people were talking about what happened in Paris, the terrorist attacks there, another terrorist attack occurred in Lebanon, where you had dozens of innocent Muslims attacked by these extremists, these ISIS people. So the point is, you have Muslims on the front lines fighting against terrorism. And it's just wrong to alienate those allies, by preventing all Muslims from entering this country, by imposing all these discriminatory, anti-Muslim type of measures. It just alienates you from people who are in the fight against this terrorist threat. It's Muslims, from Turkey, Muslims from other countries. You have Kurds. You have Syrians who are fighting against ISIS members. You have people in Iraq who are fighting against ISIS and other terrorist groups. And you want to slap them in the face by discriminating against an entire religion. That's just stupid. You want to slap them in the face by closing mosques in America. That's ridiculous. You want to slap them in the face by increasing surveillance of Muslim communities. That's just not smart police work. In order to find out about these terrorists, you need to have ties to the Muslim community. You have to have good relationships with the Muslim communities. Because when you have that line of communication and that type of relationship, the Muslims are able to identify those extremists amongst them, and they're able to keep the authorities informed about terrorist plots and potential terrorists. But you destroy all of that when you impose these anti-Muslim measures, when you create an atmosphere that fuels anti-Muslim sentiment and actually hate crimes. You have various hate crimes being reported around the country involving acts of violence against Muslims. And those types of crimes against Muslims only fuel the terrorist cause, because the terrorists are able to say, well, they are crusaders, they hate Muslims, etc., etc. And they use that propaganda to inspire others to join their cause. So this idea is just ridiculous. You know, this idea of banning Muslims and those other proposals that I mentioned before. They serve no useful purpose. All they do is increase his poll numbers among the extreme far right. That's the only purpose that these proposals will serve. They won't keep America safe. They will destroy our ties to allies. And they will make it more difficult to fight against terrorism. It's just that simple. And ultimately, many of these ideas, these anti-Muslim proposals, they violate the fundamental principles that this country professes to espouse. You know, ideas of freedom of religion, something that is protected by the First Amendment. You can't call yourself a patriot and at the same time try to undermine the First Amendment of the Constitution. You simply can't. No candidate who wants to undermine the First Amendment should be elected. No candidate. They should be condemned universally. And I'm glad that you have Republicans and Democrats condemning Donald Trump's conduct. You have Paul Ryan, who's spoken out. You have a few other senators, a senator from South Carolina who's spoken out, Lindsey Graham, and others. And I commend those people, because you can't fight terrorism without the input and the support of other Muslims. And I just want to say this. I wrote a blog article yesterday about Donald Trump, and I compared him to Hitler, because these anti-Muslim proposals, ultimately, they lead in a direction that Germany went in, the direction towards Holocaust, the direction towards oppression, the direction towards genocide. See, I'm sure that many Muslims, when they heard about Donald Trump and his anti-Mexican ideas, they probably didn't say anything. They probably were like, oh, it's just Mexicans, so who cares? When Donald Trump called Mexicans rapists and criminals and drug dealers and all that stuff, many of them probably just ignored it because he was just talking about those Mexicans. And now that he's talking about the Muslims, now those Muslims understand. And perhaps maybe these other groups will understand when he finally gets around to oppressing them. Also, I want to respond to something that someone said in one of those videos. They mentioned that Arabs enslaved black people. They talked about how Arabs have never defended black people, so why are black people defending Arabs? And I just want to make it real plain. This is not about defending any particular group of people. It's about defending a principle, and that's the principle of freedom of religion. It's about the idea that no one should be discriminated against because of the religion that they practice or because of their ethnic group. And as a people who have been victims of discrimination, we should be able to understand that. Also, people want to judge a religion based on the conduct of some people within that religion. Yes, there are racist Arabs. Yes, there are Arabs that enslaved black people, and there are Arabs today that enslave black people around the world. But we have to judge a religion not based on the conduct of some individuals who profess to believe in that religion. We have to judge the religion by its primary sources. And for Muslims, the primary source of guidance is the Quran. And if we look at what the Quran says about human beings, it is clear that it advocates the idea of equality of humanity. Man is not judged based on the color of his skin or his country of origin. Mankind is judged based on its righteousness. The individual is judged based on his piety and his God consciousness. That's what the individual is judged on, based on the religion of Islam. That is reflected in the Quran and is also reflected in the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In one of his very last sermons, he talked about the equality of mankind. He talked about how there is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, etc. So this idea that Islam is a racist religion is simply false. It simply is, because the religion has to be judged based on the professed values of that religion. And, in terms of slavery, I'll just say this. Throughout the Quran, there are plenty of verses that talk about how people should free slaves. There are plenty of verses that talk about how that is a way to atone for sins. So, for now, that's all that I'll say about that. And I may in the future do a video styled as a documentary to address the whole question of slavery and Islam. So with that, I'll just say peace. Please rate, comment, and subscribe.